Welcome to a heavyweight showdown between two world champions. It's Veselin Topalov versus Vladimir Kramnik at the prestigious Corus tournament, and a brilliant fighting game is guaranteed. Topalov begins with the pawn to d4, and Kramnik replies with d5. The players enter a queen's gambit declined, and with c6 and e6 we get a classic semi-Slav defense, one of the most solid and respected openings in chess. Topalov chooses the aggressive bishop to g5, and after black kicks it with pawn moves to h6 and g5, white strikes in the center with e4. Kramnik captures on c4 and expands with b5, steering the game into the notoriously sharp anti-Moran variation. The last developing moves are played, bishops come to e2 and b7, white castles, and the knights are developed. The key moment of the opening is Topalov planting his knight powerfully on the e5 square, seizing space and asking questions of black's setup. And right here, Topalov uncorks a thunderbolt. But it's a move born of pure aggression, not accuracy. The computer shows a much calmer, stronger path forward. The best try was pawn to a4, challenging black's queenside. After the knights are traded on e5, the pawn recaptures, the queens come off the board, and white is just slightly better in this quiet endgame. But in the game, Topalov launches the spectacular knight takes pawn on f7. An electrifying move, but it's an error that hands the advantage to Kramnik. Kramnik has no choice. He correctly accepts the sacrifice, and his king takes the knight on f7. He's now up a full piece. Topalov tries to justify his sacrifice, pushing his pawn to e5. The position explodes with activity. Knights land on d5 and e4, the black king bravely walks to e7, and all the pieces join the fight. White has compensation, but black is defending well. Topalov's queen slides to c2. In response, Kramnik's queen snaps up the free pawn on d4, a move that looks strong but dangerously opens lines for white. And here it comes, queen to g6, a sensational, brilliant move from Topalov. He completely ignores his bishop on g4, sacrificing it to blast open the dark squares around Kramnik's king. The game is turned on its head. Kramnik takes the bait. His queen takes the bishop on g4, walking right into the tactical storm Topalov has conjured. And this is the devastating point. Queen takes the bishop on g7 with check. A fantastic follow-up, the only move that keeps the attack going, and white is now completely winning. But Kramnik is a legendary defender. He finds the incredible king to d8, the one and only move that keeps him in the game and avoids immediate disaster. The attack continues as white's knight takes the bishop on b7 with check. The king moves to c8, and the fight shifts to the queenside. Pawns are pushed, a rook joins in on c1, and after a series of captures, the dust settles with white holding a clear advantage. Topalov pushes his pawn to c4, solidifying his grip. After a rook move from black, white's knight returns with a check on d6, tightening the screws. Incredible defense. Kramnik finds king to Haupt, another only move. This is a brilliant resource with a hidden trap. It prepares to meet queen to ef7 by trapping it with rook to f8. And Topalov plays queen to ef7, walking straight into the idea. Kramnik springs the trap with rook to e8, and suddenly the white queen has no escape. In this incredibly complex moment, Topalov makes a small slip, letting some of his winning advantage fade. There was a more precise way to handle losing the queen. The best move was pawn to h3 first. After rook takes the queen on f7, the g-pawn recaptures the black queen on g4. Black's knight moves to f4, but white's knight takes the rook on f7, winning a full piece. Instead of that, Topalov plays pawn takes the knight on d5. It's still a strong move, but it's not the knockout blow, and Kramnik correctly cashes in. Rook takes the queen on f7 is a great find, and the only move to punish white's slip. And here's the point. After the knight recaptures on f7, the other rook swings over to f8. White can deliver a check on c6, but the king steps to b7, and black is winning a piece back. Topalov finds a clever in-between move. Rook takes the pawn on c6 with check. The king is forced to step to b8, and now the knight takes the rook on f7. White gets a rook and a knight for the queen, and the position remains incredibly sharp. But here, under immense pressure, Kramnik makes a critical error. This passive rook move allows white to consolidate. A more active defense was required. The best try was queen to e2, activating the queen. White's rook comes to c3, the pawn pushes to b2, the rook checks on b3, and after the king steps to a8, black is holding on. But in the game, Kramnik plays rook to e8, and this gives Topalov the chance to seize a winning advantage once again. And Topalov pounces. Knight to d6 is a fantastic punishing move that secures the win. Here's why it's so strong. After the rook moves, white's rook comes to c4. The queen moves to e2, but white's pawn takes on e6, winning a pawn and leaving his position totally dominant. With the advantage secured, Topalov's plan is simple and brutal. push the passed e-pawn. Black's pieces scramble, but after white's rook lands on b4, the pawn rolls all the way up to e7, just one square from becoming a new queen. Kramnik's knight jumps to d5, trying to form a blockade. White's rook mops up a pawn on b3, and after black's knight captures the dangerous pawn on e7, the pieces continue to maneuver. But white remains in complete control. Facing relentless pressure, Kramnik makes another small slip, creating an unnecessary weakness around his king. A more solid move was called for: rook to g8, rook to b2, queen to d3, pawn to a5, knight to f4. But in the game, Kramnik pushes the pawn to h5, and this just gives white's knight a new hook for the attack. Topalov immediately exploits the weakness. The knight hops to f7, eyeing the g5 square. Kramnik shuffles his rook to c8, but the pressure is building. Topalov pushes his pawn to e6. A very strong move, though not the absolute most precise. In a practical sense, white is still completely winning. The pawns keep moving. Black pushes to a6, but white's knight snaps off the weak pawn on g5. Black's h-pawn advances, and white's bishop comes to d6, preparing the final assault. And another inaccuracy from Kramnik. This rook move fails to address the main threat of the e-pawn. He needed to coordinate his pieces for a better defense. The best try was rook to e8. After white pushes the a-pawn, the knight can reroute to e7, the rook comes to b6, and the knight lands on d5 to blockade. But after his move, rook to g8, white's path to victory becomes much simpler. A simple, strong move from Topalov, rook to b2, improving his piece and preparing for the final phase of the attack. Kramnik tries to stir up trouble with queen to d3, but this turns out to be inaccurate, allowing white to force a winning sequence. Topalov pushes the pawn to e7. Surprisingly, this is a slight inaccuracy. While white is still winning easily, it wasn't the most clinical blow, and that is the final mistake. Knight to f6 looks like a natural blockading move, but it steps right into a beautiful tactical shot that ends the game. There it is, bishop to e5. A fantastic game-winning move from Topalov. The idea is to deflect the knight, after which black's entire position collapses. Kramnik tries to sidestep with knight to d7, but it's no use. The damage is done, and white's follow-up is crushing. And the final blow, knight to e6. A great move that creates unstoppable threats, and the game is over. And at this point, Vladimir Kramnik resigns. White wins a truly spectacular game. It was a roller coaster, but Topalov's brilliant queen sacrifice proved decisive. Kramnik saw that he was about to lose even more material. Black can try a desperate check with rook takes pawn on g2, but after the king takes back, the queen checks on d5. The king just steps to g1, and after queen takes the knight on e6, white is up a full rook.